Everyone wants to live a long and healthy life with a body which looks and performs how they want it to. Yet so many search for the answers by taking the advice from peers and by following the dietary and training plans of people with different goals and outcomes to which they're searching.
Within the health and fitness industry, there's a significant amount of disinformation from a wide variety of self-proclaimed experts, never really tying together what you want or need to hear. There are people who are performing at their best, and there are others who don't know where to begin. This podcast aims to take you through the compendium of what is diet and fitness to allow you to design your own training programs to meet your specific needs.
In each episode, we're going to discuss a new topic surrounding diet, fitness and mindset which builds on previous knowledge. This allows you to understand and appreciate the fundamentals before we delve into the more specific needs of top-level athletes.
This podcast is hosted by James and Max. James is a registered dietitian and nutritionist who's worked within the NHS and private sector. He specialises in improving athletic performance, enhancing training recovery and accelerating muscle growth. And I'm Max, a strength and conditioning coach who specialises in athletic performance and personal development. I've worked with GB athletes in bobsleigh and rowing, and also alongside semi-professional and professional rugby players.
Together, we hope to provide a wealth of knowledge and value to you, the listener. Thanks for tuning in. This is My Athletic Compendium.
Don't look at me like that.
Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode of My Athletic Compendium. We're on what, episode 10 now?
Approaching. I think we're on like 8.
Okay, well we're almost there. Thanks if you've been sticking with us from the start, really appreciate it. Obviously if this is your first episode that you're listening to or even watching, then do make sure you go back to the start. We've built on the foundations. We've started with nutrition and the fundamentals of training, which will hopefully improve your performance over time. And we are looking to build on that knowledge as we go through the podcasts. So yeah, go all the way back to the start, episode 1, episode 2, leave a like, let us know what you think of the podcast as well. We'd love to hear some feedback on how we can improve, what you'd like to hear next. We do have our step-by-step approach of what we want to work through, but if there's anything that you are really wanting to know, then obviously leave your suggestions in a review, or you can message us directly on our Instagram account. What is it? My Athletic Compendium on Instagram. So check us out on there. But this week we are talking about strength.
Yeah.
Perfect. So obviously Max is probably going to take the forefront of this podcast. I'll ask him several questions because I want to develop my knowledge. And then there's a little bit about nutrition on how we can improve our strength. So, Max, how can we get strong as an ox, strong as a bear?
Well, there's lots of different tips that I can give you, and lots of different sort of ideas as well. But essentially, strength training is in terms of exercises. You want to be performing at your maximum effort. You want to be doing low repetitions with a high amount of weight, with a decent amount of rest in between. I'll explain that a little bit more. So if you want to get stronger, you've got to lift heavier. You're not going to get stronger by lifting nothing. So yeah, you want to put a lot of load on the bar. You want to be able to lift absolutely maximally. You don't want to be leaving any reps out there. If you're going for 3 reps or 1 rep or 5 reps on that sort of range, you want to be lifting the heaviest weight that you can lift for that amount of reps.
Obviously with good form.
Of course, form will deteriorate with a fatigue or under that amount of load. But yeah, ideally you want to strive to have the same technique in your warm-up sets just with the bar as your 1 rep max. That's what you're aspiring to do.
So what's the importance of getting strong? Why is it important to get strong for sports performance?
Great question, and I'm glad you asked that question. So in terms of sports performance, strength is a part of an equation which produces power. So your strength and the force that's applied times by the speed or the velocity creates power. So if you work on
power equals
speed times velocity times force.
And the velocity is the speed of
Yeah.
which you move something.
Yeah.
And the force being the weight.
The actual, the
The
weight,
load.
The load, yeah.
Cool.
So that's why you want to be strong, because if you're developing both sides of that equation, the speed and the force, the velocity and the force, sorry, then that's going to make you more powerful,
Mm-hmm.
which on any kind of sports scenario is going to be useful. You have to be powerful, not maybe necessarily with endurance athletes such as marathon runners and triathletes and things like that. But power is not necessarily the most important thing. But for most team sports like hockey, like netball, like football, like rugby, like American football, all those kind of sports, you have to be powerful and
Because you want to be running quicker, hitting the ball quicker, kicking the ball quicker.
further and if you're trying to break, especially if it's a contact sport, you want to be breaking through contact, and you need to be powerful to do that.
Right.
So that's why working that side of the equation is so important. This sort of strength side of the equation, and then obviously speed. That's going to be a separate.
We can talk about that later.
Thing, but essentially strength is part of becoming powerful.
Okay.
So lifting absolute maximally, and I've mentioned sort of low reps. The rep range for strength training is 5 or less. That's sort of optimal. Of course, you can get stronger with hypertrophy training, but if you're talking to be to train for strength.
Yeah.
Ideally, you'd want to be in the lower, like below 5 reps.
Right.
Rep range.
And what sort of loads are you using in that?
It's just maximally. So, say you're doing your bench press. What I would tend to do is you'd start off with a hypertrophy block, which we covered last week, last week it would have been. You do a hypertrophy block. Then I'd usually do some kind of testing where I would test someone's 3 rep max or 1 rep max, just to see what their output is, and then using that, we would do a strength block using the weights that we lifted for the 1 rep max or the 3 rep max. It's kind of calculated a little bit, so we know roughly what weight or what load you should be lifting for those exercises.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah. So 1 to 5 reps. Sets wise, you want to be doing a decent amount of sets. I'd start with 4, maybe go up to 6. That's how I kind of work. But there's loads of studies out there that kind of have an optimal set range. But that's kind of what I go for. I'd start with sort of sets of 4, and then with that progressive overload that we spoke about last week, you want to be adding sets to increase the volume, to help that progressive overload.
So you're still striving for progressive overload with strength?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And in between those sets, obviously you want to be resting for a decent amount of time. Reason being is for each set to lift as heavy as you possibly can for those amount of reps, you have to be not fatigued. You have to be lifting at your maximum ability. Of course, over the as the sets go by and you're getting on sort of the later sets, you are going to have some central nervous system fatigue, which is a different kind of fatigue to muscular fatigue. It's just the ability to produce a high amount of force rapidly. We'll go into that in another episode because that is a little bit more complicated. But all you need to know is that your central nervous system or your ability to lift a heavy weight will fatigue.
Right. So, going back to our hypertrophy episode, we were speaking about the progressive overload and how that's really important for muscle growth.
Yeah.
But then you're in the rep range of, what was it, like 6 to 12, 6 to 15?
Yeah.
So the difference here is if you're training for strength, you are reducing the number of reps because you're lifting heavier.
Yeah.
So you're using a bigger percentage of your 1 rep max.
Yeah.
But you're doing less reps, but you're still striving for that same progressive overload.
Yeah, you're not going to hit the same amount of volume.
So
that big number that we spoke about afterwards, which is the weight times the reps times the sets.
Yeah.
The volume's not going to be as high. With strength training, that's not your focus.
Okay.
The volume isn't your focus. It's more about the amount of weight that you're lifting, the amount of load that you're lifting for those repetitions. That's all. That's the basics of it. In terms of getting the progression, you would do that. You can do that in a different number of different sort of training methods. One would be an eccentric load. So that's one of my favourite types of lifting to do.
So what's an eccentric load? An
eccentric load is, or eccentric training is, essentially you've got 110% of your maximum lifting ability. So say your bench press is 1 rep max is 100 kilograms.
Yeah.
You go 10% onto that, so 110 kilograms. You're not actually able to lift it.
Okay.
You're holding it at the top, and you're going to control the way down as slow and as controlled as possible until you hit your chest, and then your spotter will help you press it back up.
Right.
And he or she will help lift it back up, because you're not actually physically able to push it back up.
Yeah.
So the eccentric load, you're going to be doing 110% of what you're capable of doing.
Okay.
And that eccentric load, there's loads of studies to suggest that is the best way to help your strength gains.
Okay.
Which is really interesting, I find, because a lot of people think, well, you know, the rep doesn't count unless I do the concentric phase, which is the push in this scenario.
But you're getting the benefit.
But you get the benefit from that negative, because you're able to do 110% of the load that you'd be able to lift.
So is that something you would use as an accessory to the main lift, or is it something that you would use as like you just said, maybe the progression? So let's say week 1 you're doing bench press.
Yep.
You've got 5 sets of 3 reps for your strength. Week 2 comes around. Would you still do normal bench press, and then maybe your second exercise would be focusing on the eccentric, or would you just say, we're just going to work on the eccentric today?
We're just going to work on the eccentric today. I would maybe do like a couple more weeks of just conventional lifting. So maybe the first 2 to 3 weeks, I would say conventional bench press, lift as heavy as you can, 3 reps, 5 sets. Then week 4, then we would say, okay, let's do some eccentric loading, 110% of the weight that you have been lifting for those reps, and you're just going to do a really nice controlled eccentric.
Yeah.
Again, that's the way down on the bench press, or on the way down in a squat, and essentially just replace the exercise with the eccentric loading.
Right.
There's a few reasons why you wouldn't do it as well as a bench press. So say you did your heavy 5 sets of 3 reps bench press, and then you went to eccentric loading. It's too much for it's increasing your chance of injury, because you're going to fatigue your central nervous system to such an extent that you're not going to have the same control that you would at the start of the session. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Essentially, basically what I mean by that is you want to be able to improve your strength gains safely. You don't want to be doing too many like heavy lifting in one session, because it can cause injury. The last thing you want to do is rupture your pectoral muscle, because that's a nasty injury.
Okay.
But yeah, so you'd replace it. You wouldn't do too much.
So we've got eccentric training to improve strength. What else can we do?
You can do an isometric press. So isometric is a hold. There aren't many gyms that have this kind of setup.
Right.
Essentially, an isometric hold on, again, for example, a bench press, is you'd be in your bench press position about halfway up to 3/4 up on the way up on your bench press. You'd have 2 bars that are basically stopping your barbell from moving up anymore. Yeah. Right? And all you're doing with that isometric hold is you're pressing as hard as you possibly can against those metal bars. So the bar's not moving, but you're pressing as hard as you can. There's no weight on the bar. Okay. It's just like pressing against a brick wall. It's just, you're not going to move anything, but you're just going to press as hard as you can. Yeah. For several seconds, maybe 3 to 5 seconds. Again, there's studies that will have the right amount of time and the amount of reps and sets and stuff to do. But yeah, that isometric hold is another way of doing it. Okay. Does that make sense?
So what, like 3 sets of 5 seconds?
Yeah. Again, I off the top of my head, I don't know the actual the best sort of timings and the best sort of. It's not a very common training method to use, but it is something that does help. Eccentric loading is an easy one to do, because all you need is a spotter and plenty of weight.
Yep.
But the isometric holds, obviously not a lot of gyms have that kind of facility.
You need a rack, wouldn't you, rather than just a...
And just a conventional like bench.
Yeah.
But it's also and also the way racks are set up, it wouldn't work necessarily. But there are really cool pieces of kit that you can. It's like a dynamometer.
Yeah.
Do you remember those? You use them in like GCSEP where there's a dynamometer, like a scale here, and you squeeze as hard as you can for your grip strength. It's essentially one of those, but you do it in bench press or squat.
Oh, I see. So it measures.
So it measures the amount of, I think it's
power or
Newton meters or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's Newton meters. It's essentially the same as that grip thing, but because you're just squeezing as hard as you can. You're not actually squeezing and moving something. It's just you're squeezing as hard as you can, and then it produces a value, which is good for testing as well.
Right.
Yeah, and that would be you can do that on bench press. You can set up for squat. You just be like 3/4 of the way up on your squat, and then pushing against the stationary bar. Yeah.
I suppose you could do it with a deadlift as well, couldn't you?
Yeah.
Pulling against the bar.
Yeah. No, exactly.
Nice.
So they're just a few training methods that you can do, but the key takeaway here is that you've got to be it's maximum effort, absolute maximum effort, 5 reps or less, plenty of rest in between, optimum sort of 3 to 5 minutes, which is quite a decent amount of time.
Per set,
yeah. Yeah. Some people go like power lifters, sometimes go even longer. Some power lifters go for like fucking 10 minutes.
Right.
Which is a real pain in the ass if you're trying to get on that piece of equipment. But that's a good question to answer, because so many people say like, there's this dude who was wearing, elbow sleeves, and he was sat on the bench on his phone for 10 minutes in between his sets. He was lifting a bigger amount of weight, but it was really annoying, and that's why they're power lifters. They need plenty of rest in between their sets to lift maximally.
One question. So if you're doing a strength training block, obviously your workout won't just consist of one exercise.
No. I know what you're going to ask with this.
So are you doing one, for example, are you doing strength for each, because you like to do full body methods if someone can only sort of train three times a week, four times a week. Would you be doing strength for each of those exercises, because you're obviously working different muscle groups in different exercises, different parts of your body, or are you doing one strength exercise and the rest being something else? How would you structure it?
That's got quite a few different answers to that question. That's a very good question to ask. So rule number 1, which I use at least, is your central nervous system will not be able to cope with you doing every single exercise. Say you've got like 6 to 8 different exercises. Your central nervous system is not going to be able to cope with having 5 or 6 or up to 8 exercises all doing maximal strength. You will fatigue, you'll feel like shit.
Right.
What I would do is stick to 3 maximal.
3 exercises.
Maximum, yeah. I'd usually do legs, push, pull.
Yeah.
So say I did a squat maximally, deadlift, a bench press maximally, and a pull maximally.
Yeah.
So like chin ups or whatever.
Yeah.
And then the rest would be accessories. I'd maybe do a bit of core work, because core work is massively important when you're doing strength training as well, because that's kind of your trunk. That's you can't push or pull or lift any weight, heavy weight, without having a strong core. So
can't pull without a good core.
Exactly. In every sense of the word. So yeah, that's all I'd do. When it comes to strength training, you don't have to be doing loads and loads of exercises.
Right.
I'd choose, if you're doing a total body approach, maybe 3 exercises to hit all those points, and then focus on core work and maybe some like rehabilitation stuff, like prehab stuff.
Okay.
Maybe a bit of rotator cuff work, things like that, just to, again, prevent injury, but also to help. It sort of facilitates the lift as well.
So when you're saying some accessory stuff, would you be doing hypertrophy stuff in with that as well?
That's another point that I was going to bring up. So it's a good question. So whenever you're with your session, you should always have one focus, whether it's strength, hypertrophy, endurance, cardiovascular, whatever it is. You should have that focus. I would never recommend mixing. Say you're doing a strength session, you're doing your legs push pull for strength, and then you're doing arms for hypertrophy, or you're doing a shitload of shoulder press, or like a row for hypertrophy. It's it's never optimal. You've got to focus on this one aspect of your training in one session.
Okay.
It's essentially like if you're doing a strength block, you should focus on strength.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Within reason. So, like, for example, here's a good example for you. If you're going to do cardio after a session, I would always do the cardio after a hypertrophy session rather than a strength session. The reason being is because in that strength stretch session, you're training your muscles to contract maximally.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're then going to do something that's a little bit more continuous and lots of repetitions, it's not getting the training effect that you're after.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
CrossFit.
That's that. Yeah, pretty much. But that's essentially what I do. So, if I'm going to do any kind of cardio stuff, I'd make it after a hypertrophy session, because then I'm doing plenty of repetitions, plenty of sets and stuff.
Right.
So it kind of matches the theme.
Okay.
Whereas with strength, just leave it to maximal, quick, hard movements.
So your block is that 4 to 6 weeks again, sort of thing.
Yeah. Again, you don't have. I do incorporate a little bit, because with most athletes, if you're going to do a strength block of 6 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to let that athlete do any cardiovascular, because that would be taking away from another aspect of their
performance.
Performance, exactly. So yes, you want to be focusing on a strength block, but you still have to keep the other bits topped up, don't you?
So how would you structure their week if you're focusing on strength?
Mid-season, they've got a game on the weekend. I would get their high volume at the sort of start of the week. So high volume meaning fitness and a bit of hypertrophy work, and then I'd sort of towards the latter end of the week before their game, I'd focus on their strength, and then as they get closer, they need maybe their power. Again, if you're focusing mainly on strength training,
Mm-hmm.
then you just drop the reps a little bit lower for all the sessions. So you could still do a bit of hypertrophy, but the reps would be lower, so they're lifting heavier, because that's going to help their strength.
Right, with you.
So you're never going to, unless you are a power lifter, but even power lifters, they have to do a bit of hypertrophy, because they've got bigger cross-sectional area in their muscle.
Got to build the mass to build the strength.
To build the strength, exactly. So there's always going to be a crossover. You should always touch on different aspects, but you should always have a main focus.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm with you.
Yeah. There's quite a lot of, obviously we wanted this episode to be focused on strength training, but there's so many different aspects.
Isn't it,
it's
really?
all interlinked, and it's just like you said, and I'm sure it's the same with nutrition as well. It's all interlinked, and that's a good learning point for this podcast as well, is that although you're doing a focus being like a strength block or a hypertrophy block or a fitness block or whatever,
there is always a crossover.
There's always a crossover. You don't want to be forgetting the other aspects of their performance that they need to be working on as well.
Mm-hmm.
A good example, just plucking one of my athletes, one of my rugby players out. We're going through a strength block at the minute, because we've got some testing that's coming up soon,
Mm-hmm.
but he also wants to drop a bit of timber to get around the pitch a little bit quicker and a little bit more efficiently. So we are doing those lower repetitions, but we're also getting him to do a little bit of cardio as well, which obviously isn't going to
perfectly help his
strength, but it's going to help him
his performance. Yeah,
so that's a very good point to get across as well.
I get
There's always going to be crossovers, and that's part of this podcast as well, is to kind of, we're going to teach you the sort of basics, but it does get quite interlinked and quite there's a lot to talk about essentially, and that's why I think this podcast is quite good.
Perfect. But we're biased, aren't we?
Yeah, we are biased, but it's not quite good. It's fucking the best.
I've got one more question.
Go on.
Bands. Using bands for strength training, is that a thing?
Yeah. So yes,
I've seen it. I've heard it.
You've seen it. You've heard it.
Used it.
So bands essentially eliminate, if you're using it for strength training. So again, you're going maximal weight. Bands, similar to chains as well, eliminate what's called the strength curve.
Ooh.
So
Now we're getting deep.
Now we're getting deep. So again, using bench press as an example, just because it's nice and easy. If you've got bands that are attached around the bar and attached to the floor, as you go down, the stretch on the band is going to become less, and therefore there's going to be less resistance on the bar, right?
Yeah.
That's how an elastic band works. And then as you press away, the tension on the band increases and makes it harder,
Yeah.
right? So that's essentially eliminating, get rid of the bands for a minute. If you're doing a normal bench press, from the chest to about halfway up or just after halfway, that's the hardest part of the lift.
Yeah.
And then after that, it kind of just goes, doesn't it? Like
Yeah.
it's hard, 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 and then you get past the sticking point, and then you're like, that. It essentially eliminates that.
My dirty mind is
It's
just
your dirty
going.
mind just
Go on.
cracking on.
No,
that.
no, I'm with you.
Yeah, so it's eliminating that. So basically, it's just hard all the way.
I'm sure it is.
It's difficult all the way up on the lift. You can also use bands for speed work.
I have used them for speed work.
Yeah. So again, you're dropping the weight down, and you're just trying to move the bar as fast as quack. We're both really
Fast
tired
as quack.
today. Fast as quack. Yeah, we're both really tired today, aren't we?
Yeah.
You're trying to move the bar really quick.
Yeah.
And the bands just facilitate that. Again, get rid of the strength curve, but just make the speed of the bar more consistent. While adding a little bit of resistance as well.
Right.
Again, chains do the same. In terms of speed of bar work, I'd much rather use bands than chains. Obviously, It's just a little bit more effective. But yes, you can use them for speed work. But if you're using it for strength, again, the other side of that equation that I mentioned at the beginning, that create power, it just eliminates the strength curve.
Right. So using bands, for example, is that another sort of
Training method.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say accessory, but
Yeah.
that was the wrong word. Training method.
Training method.
So it's a bit like using the eccentric training, the isometric training.
Exactly.
You've got
It's just
bands as
another
well.
one of those, which I'm glad you picked up, because I like using bands as well. The only thing that just to be aware of is if you are a rugby player and you struggle with your shoulders, if they do pop out a little like every now and again, or if you have weaker rotator cuffs and stuff like that, it's probably one to be very careful of.
Right.
Especially if you're lifting heavy, just because as you lift the bar off the rack, the bands can kind of pull the bar around and challenge your shoulders quite a lot.
Okay.
Challenge your rotator cuff quite a lot. Again, try it out. If you've not done it before, set it up. Just use the bar and practice it and get used to the bands.
Maybe watch some videos on how to use them before.
Yeah. Make sure you're setting it up properly. The best thing in the world is to have a coach there to show you how to do it if they know how to do it. But just practice it with a light bar. Slowly build the weight up and get used to how it feels. But it's just one to be aware of. If you struggle with shoulder issues, then be mindful of it. There are other training methods that you can use to improve your strength training, to help your strength training, but that are going to be a little bit safer for you.
Sounds good. Got any more, or is that you?
I mean, I could talk about it all fucking night, but
we try and keep it within a certain time frame, so we don't bore you all. But equally, so that you get value and don't zone out and crash your cars if you listen to us on the way home. I've got a little bit to say nutrition-wise. It's not a massive component because, obviously your nutritional factors are generally associated with trying to gain muscle mass or trying to lose weight. When you're strength training, you to be gaining strength, as if that's your goal and you want to get as strong as possible, being in a calorie deficit, so eating less than what you're burning, is not going to be beneficial for improving your strength. It puts a lot of strain on your system, and on your central nervous system, for example. You're generally more fatigued, which doesn't help when you're strength training. It's also going to not promote those positive, what I'm trying to say, like muscular training adaptions, as well as it would do if you were in a calorie surplus. eating more than you need. So I'd always recommend at least eating your requirements and maintaining your weight when you're strength training, or at least exceeding your calorie requirements, because again, you said there's that crossover. So most people that are trying to get stronger are probably trying to get a bit bigger as well, so there is that overlap. So being in a calorie surplus, i.e. eating more than what your body requires, will help you put on more weight, i.e. muscle, which will also help your strength training. So an extra 400 calories per day is going to help you, promote that weight gain. In terms of what you need to eat, you need to be making sure you're meeting your protein requirements. That's an absolute given, as well as meeting your energy requirements.
Am I right in saying, sorry to put it,
No.
am I right in saying, because I know that some or certain fats, or just fat in general, can help with your central nervous system. Is that right?
Oh, you've got me there. Might do.
I vaguely remember doing something about it at uni.
That's something that really hasn't jumped into my brain
No.
anytime soon. I know, obviously, sort of fish oils are pretty good for making sure your central nervous system's pretty good, like brain development and that, but I'm not too sure how it would benefit, central nervous system recovery, for example. It's always good to get omega-3 fatty acids, which are your fish oils, really. And it's also found in nuts and things like that, but that's really good for making sure your brain stays nice and healthy, but not too sure in terms of central nervous system.
I might be wrong, to be fair.
Make sure you get your fat intakes as well. I think a minimum amount of fat you should be eating is about 20% of your calories. The reason for that is if you are constantly having low fat intakes and you're an athlete, you can start to deplete your ability to produce your sex hormones. So for men and women, obviously it's testosterone, estrogen, progesterone as well. But if you're messing up the production of those hormones, obviously testosterone is really important for muscle growth. It's really important for strength as well. If you're ruining your ability to produce that because you're not eating enough fat contains cholesterol, and those hormones are made from cholesterol, then obviously you'll deplete your ability to improve your strength as much. So make sure you're meeting your fat intakes as well, make sure you're meeting your protein intakes, and make sure you are at least maintaining your calorie requirement, if not exceeding. That would be beneficial. Prior to strength training, there's a few tips you can do to improve your strength. So one is supplementing with creatine. Some of you may have heard of creatine. It comes in many different forms: creatine phosphate, creatine monohydrate. What's the other forms of creatine? I think that's it. Those are the major ones. Gluconate.
Creapure thing. What's that?
Creapure is like a trademark of that.
As soon as I said that, I was like, oh shit.
It says I think that's creatine monohydrate, but it's
okay.
Someone's just trademarked the name. But creatine is, you naturally have a certain amount in your muscles, and I think we spoke about it in the energy systems and how your body uses different energy systems for energy. But when you're doing maximal effort, like sprinting, lifting a weight as heavy as you can, you're using that phosphocreatine system, which is in your muscles. And the more phosphocreatine you have, the more energy you can have readily available to do that explosive exercise. So you want to maximize how much your muscles can hold this creatine, and the best way to do that is supplementing with creatine. I mean, creatine's naturally found in like red meats, so not a lot of people eat a lot of red meat, but it is found in red meat. But supplementing it is the best way. Probably you don't need to do a loading dose, which some manufacturers suggest, but I think that's just to essentially make you have more, so you buy more.
Is that right?
Yeah, you don't really need to do the loading dose, you just need to have the maintenance dose, which is about 5 grams per day. That, taken over several weeks to months, will build up your system. You can take that continually. there's been lots of studies on whether it's safe and that, and there's no detrimental effects known for taking creatine supplementation. People think it causes like renal issues, but which is your kidneys, but it doesn't. It just shows a marker in your urine because you're weeing out some of it. So it looks like kidney damage, but it's not. It's just excess creatine that's going out in your wee. But that essentially, you build up that in your muscles in it, and there's several studies showing that by supplementing it over a sustained period of time significantly increases your strength output. It increases your sprinting times. It increases your anaerobic performance, so your ability to perform with lack of oxygen. It also improves your aerobic capacity, so your ability to run for longer at a certain rate. Strength, like I said, it also improves power output. So you were talking about that equation before. You've got the strength, what is it, velocity times force is power. So it increases your power output, whether that's because it increases your strength, but obviously if you're sprinting quicker as well, you're getting that faster movement. So there's lots of benefits to taking creatine for improving your strength. It also improves muscle mass as well. So lots of benefits for athletes.
Yeah, it's a great supplement to be fair.
And it's pretty cheap and it's legal. It's it's not banned by any of the FDA or any sporting association. So I'd recommend taking it if you're over the age of 16. It's pretty healthy. You'll be fine. What's another one? Caffeine as well before weight training or even your can't get my words out. Your training sessions, that's the word. God, it's been an awfully long week. Before your training sessions, so caffeine, again, loads of studies showing it improves strength, your ability to improve a 1 rep max, your ability to improve a 3-5 rep max. Obviously, the more you're lifting, the more stress you're putting on muscles, so it also improves that hypertrophy effect because you're gaining more stress. And obviously if you're lifting more, again, like we said with that equation, you're going to have a higher power output. So that has also been shown to increase sprinting times and also anaerobic work capacity. So those two supplements, you don't have, caffeine before a workout, but creatine doesn't matter when you take it as long as you take 5 grams a day. Those two supplements are probably the only legal ones that will actually give you any benefits to your strength training. So pop them in, have a research, do your own research if you are worried about them, or consult your doctor if you are worried about them. But those two will definitely help your strength performance. I think that wraps it up, doesn't it? So you're done, I'm done. If you guys have got any questions, then obviously hit us up on the socials and we'll respond as soon as we can. But I hope you enjoyed the episode. Thanks for tuning in. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, would really appreciate it. And we'll be back next week, next Friday. Knackered as ever, but raring to go for the next episode. So stay tuned. Thanks guys.
Bye.
Bye.